Good evening. Welcome to the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting of January 15, 2020. This meeting is being audio and video recorded per the open meeting laws of the state of Massachusetts. Tonight we'll be continuing the public hearing for the comprehensive permit for 194 Main Street. We have 7 Phillips Way, the continuation of the special permit, and we're going to start the evening off with a fee structure hearing for the ZBA. We have 2 continuances, 17 Lawrence Street, which we'll address, as well as 15 Lincoln Road. Joe, at this time, would you mind reading into the record the notice of public hearing?
Right, notice hereby given in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 11, as most recently amended, that a public hearing will be held by the Norfolk Zoning Board of Appeals on Wednesday, January 15th, 2020, at 7 p.m. in room 124 of the Norfolk Municipal Building. The Norfolk Zoning Board of Appeals will discuss proposed revisions to its rules and regulations, including revisions to the fee schedule. The proposed amendment to the regulation is available for review on the town website at www.norfolk.mass.us or in the land use office of the municipal building during regular business hours.
Thank you, Joe. Rich McCarthy, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As you recall, I came before the zoning board in December, I think it was the 18th to be precise, about revising your regulations relative to the fee schedule, whereby when applications are filed, we would have the advertisement cost would be segregated out from the filing fee. And the purpose of doing that is we have a revolving account set up, so when applicants come in, they would we would get a cost for the ad from the Sun Chronicle where we publish it, get the fee for that publication, put the deposit the money in the revolving account, and then pay the Sun Chronicle directly out of that. And the rationale behind doing that is that under our present fee structure, if you take the advertisement cost plus the general fee, we're actually in the red significantly related to the filing fee, because on average the publication cost of Sun Chronicle is around $275, I think, somewhere in that ballpark, and your filing fee is $300. So we have the Conservation Commission has that system already in place. They've been doing it for quite a while, and so Amy is familiar with that whole process. It's all done internally. There's no administrative end on the applicant, so there's no need for them to handle. It's all handled internally. The planning board voted that fee change at their December planning board meeting. So so conservation, planning, and zoning would all be in line if you adopt that revision to the fee schedule.
Okay, great. Questions from the board? Rich, the only question I had was on the significant change to a comprehensive permit. We don't really have a definition for what is considered a significant change. So do we really want to have, that's the only one I was concerned with, is having that in there at $300, because it's very arbitrary. And I don't know if we want to, do you have that? I don't think we have an answer to that. So that concerned me, was because Abbeville's a good example. One might consider that a significant change, but we did not charge him an additional fee, I don't think, for the new app, for what he's working on currently, correct?
That's correct.
So since we don't have a definition of it, I don't know if we want to include that at this time.
It's already in the regs.
It's already, so we're not changing. The only thing what we actually changed is added in the advertisement fee.
Well,
So
so
we're
while
not
we're doing it, it's a good time to, I know we're not trying to clean up everything, but it might be a good time to clean it up.
So we can go back and revisit that fee, so
Yeah.
that point taken, we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for tonight, we're just talking about the advertising piece of it.
Okay.
Sure.
Because currently that's what's in there now.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Correct.
it's an odd.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
take a look
And
at that.
Are we going to clean up any of the language? I know that Don
Yeah,
had
so
mentioned
then the-
7 o'clock versus 7:30, even though Don still thinks we start at 7:30, and he's early tonight. But
We actually are,
Kind of
so I'm
fix it.
gonna, and I'll talk to you, just kind of look at your upcoming agendas and see what can come back and
Okay.
clean up the other stuff, maybe, let's figure it out, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to clean that up and get that done too.
Any other questions with regard to the advertising fees as a separate fee on the application? Anybody else? All right. Anybody in the audience have, I don't think we do. Okay. Could I have a motion to close the public hearing then?
We can close it without the additional input?
Yes, because we're just gonna vote, we're just gonna do a vote on the advertising fee as a separate fee
Okay,
from
okay.
the application
So
fee.
moved.
Second?
Second.
All, okay. Could I have a motion to approve the new fee structure for the zoning board of appeals, separating the advertising fee from the application fee as a revolving account?
We need to first vote on,
Hmm?
Yeah, did you vote to close?
Yeah, we just did. All those in favor, we said aye.
Oh,
We
you
didn't-
did?
Yeah.
No, we didn't say aye, but say
Oh.
aye. Everyone in favor?
I said, all those, yeah, I said second. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All right. Now can I have a motion? I'm trying to keep the 7:15 clock here. Do we have a motion to approve the new fee structure, separating the advertising fee from the application fee for the zoning board of appeals?
So moved, so moved.
Second.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Rich. All right, moving right along. 7 Phillips Way, continuation of the special permit application. And I think Mr. Souza has given us some updated information.
Yes, good evening, Jim Susi with United Consultants. I did send a letter and a couple of plan pages. Those plan pages have since been amended based on Beta's review and a meeting that Rich and I had with Beta on Monday. I've made some changes to the plan. We were before the planning board last night, so if you can just go to, I think it's sheet 3 for me, please. Right there, okay. Here's the layout plan. The basic layout of everything has not changed. Okay, we did originally, this recycled asphalt rampway came off of here and swung in through here, which had the trailer trucks coming in this way to get to the back. In discussion, we're just gonna have that straight so that there's no issues with the tractor trailers. There will be a gate across it in this location so nobody can access the property after hours. And then we have a crushed stone access way for them to get to the stockpile areas. Now, I believe at the last meeting we had, there were basically 2 issues. One was that the, excuse me, the vehicles to be parked on site needed to be on a paved area. So what we've done is we've added this area over in here to store that equipment. We have listed the equipment up here, what the size of the piece of equipment is, and then how the dimensions of the parking stall that equipment will be parked in. The other issue had to do with the materials that were going to be stored on site. So we've, again, shown them on the plan, and it'll just basically be loam, sand, rice stone, infield mix, and root zone mix, which are all natural, either soils or aggregates. And then we do have a note that no crumb rubber or any synthetic field materials shall be stored on site. And I think that was pretty much all we had outstanding.
And you have 8 spaces in the front, 8 spaces in the front of the yard as well?
There's actually 17 spaces. We had a update for them, so there's 8 spaces here, and there's 9 spaces
Okay.
here.
How many?
Those are for, normal passenger vehicles.
Did it 8 in the front, right? Yeah, okay.
8 and 9. And how many handicap?
1.
1 handicap. Questions from the board? Kevin, no? Mike?
All set?
All set.
I never heard the term rice stone. Is that like pea stone?
It's smaller than pea stone. It's like a 1/4-inch stone.
Oh.
They use it in the underfield drainage.
Rich, is that under the purview of the planning board on the materials they can store in the back? You were gonna look into that, as opposed to us conditioning it, or is that a planning board condition?
Just to refresh my memory, I know it is the purview as far as outdoor screening of material, that aspect of it, or
Yes.
Yeah, so they are before the planning board for a special permit
Okay.
for the outdoor storage
Okay.
right now.
Okay. All right. Anybody here from the audience with regard to 7 Phillips Way? All right. Seeing none, Joe, would you mind, get a motion to close the public hearing?
I make a motion that we close the public hearing for the applicant for AA and JV Realty LLC for the 3 special permits pursuant to MGL Chapter 40A, Section 9 as amended, and Section J7A 2B of the Norfolk zoning bylaws to allow a contractor's headquarters in an off-highway area. That's number 1. Number 2, to allow outdoor storage of more than 3 commercial vehicles limited to the rear yard. And Section F7E of the Norfolk zoning bylaws to allow parking in the front yard of a commercial building. And the property is located 7 Phillips Way. Assessors map 18, block 16, lots 41 and 12, in a C1 zoning district.
Do I have a
Motion
second?
to close the hearing.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We'll see how our evening goes. If we can get to this, we will. If not, we'll hit at the next one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right, it is 7:14, so we have 1 minute. So, could I, 17 Lawrence Street, Abbeville. The applicant has asked for a continuation to 2/19/20. Could I have a motion to continue the public hearing for 17 Lawrence Street to 2/19/20?
So moved.
Second? At 7 o'clock?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Can I
Aye.
discuss?
Hmm?
I said, can I discuss?
No?
Sure.
Sure.
Just curious where the applicant stands on plan revisions and,
I think there's some, his engineer has had some family medical issues, so that's what's been delaying it. So that's why we don't have any updated information
okay,
at this time. He's got, and that's what we're waiting for.
okay. So they're just still actively working to
Yes.
revise the plans?
Yeah, it's just that his engineer's been backlogged a little because of some family medical.
Okay.
Okay? Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. It is 7:15, and now we're going to continue the public hearing for 194 Main Street, comprehensive permit. I'm going to recuse myself at this time and turn over the chair to Mr. Kaliza.
Thank you, Mr. Reader. Okay. Is everybody here for your team tonight that's gonna be here?
Yeah, everyone but Al.
Everyone but-
Al's sick tonight, so
Oh,
he's not
okay.
gonna be in attendance.
All right. Tell him we wish for a speedy recovery. We miss his presence. Since we last met, there was a workshop conducted on behalf of the board, and I think it would be appropriate and a good time to ask Mr. Hill to update us on the discussions that took place and give us a summary.
Sure. So we did have a working session on December 13th here at Town Hall. So a little bit more than a month ago. And this was actually at our invitation, the board's invitation. The applicant was there with his architect, his civil engineer, and his attorney. And for the board, it was myself and Rich and Cliff Bomer, who's in the audience tonight. Cliff is your architectural and design peer review consultant, and he's filed a letter that hopefully you all have in your packet, and we'll talk about that tonight. So the meeting went very well. The purpose of the meeting was mainly for Cliff to introduce some of his initial thoughts about the project and the design of the project, and just for a little bit background, the reason I suggested that Cliff be engaged with this project is that he's not really just an architect. He's very knowledgeable about site design, particularly in urban settings. And while we don't think of Norfolk as urban, this location is, and the town center is. And there's a lot of attention to design elements within the town center of Norfolk, just as there is with town centers in all of your peer communities. And in fact, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's a design review guidelines that have been recently published. This was done through a grant from the MAPC, and I believe the MAPC was leading the effort to create these, and Rich can speak to it more than I can, but there is a set of design guidelines for Norfolk Town Center, the B1 zoning district, and the types of things that these design guidelines address are not just the architecture that we think about. We think about the facade of a building. It's much more than that. It's about the size, scale, massing, height, congruity of the architectural style with the existing historic town center area. So Cliff's comments initially were both on the building style as well as the site plan, the layout, the location of buildings, parking areas, utilities, and so forth. The discussion led to a suggestion that there would be maybe breaking up the mass of the building. The building itself is essentially 3 components tied together, and each component is 120 feet long, Cliff. So this would be a very, very long building. It could very well be the largest building in Norfolk. So Cliff made a presentation, which he'll talk about tonight, to break up the massing of the building. That would have required some relocation of stormwater utilities. So we left the meeting with the plan that the development team was going to explore relocating some stormwater utilities, potentially using some abutting property to handle the stormwater runoff. That would open up space in the back to shift the building around. So we were expecting to have a revised set of plans, I thought sometime around the holidays, maybe shortly thereafter. We were expecting to get a report from the applicant in terms of the viability of doing this arrangement, the viability of moving some stormwater off-site, where actually the stormwater currently is put into a municipal system, so that wouldn't actually be a change. And so that was our expectation leaving the meeting. Fast forward to the week after New Year's, we hadn't still received any revised plans or this idea of shifting stormwater, and we are now told that the applicant is not willing or interested in making the kind of substantive changes to the site design that we talked about at the meeting on December 13th. So what we are here today to talk about is basically the same project that was filed with you guys a few months ago. There have been some tweaks to the building design, which you'll hear about tonight. The project's architect is here, and Cliff will speak to that as well. But the design of the site, the location of the building, the parking, the stormwater and septic is all pretty much the same as it was when we started. So I'm frankly disappointed. I thought there was a good opportunity here to make some positive changes to the design of the project. But that's my opinion as your attorney, but this is obviously a judgment you all have to make. In the context of 40B, one of the things you are entitled to look at are things like design. In fact, the statute, Chapter 40B, Section 20, speaks to balancing. There's a balancing test, balancing the need for affordable housing against local concerns, and among the local concerns specifically stated in Section 20 of the statute is promoting better site design or building design, preserving open spaces, and public safety and environmental impacts are all there as well. So I think that as we have the discussion tonight, you can keep in mind the design guidelines that are directly applicable, since this applies to town center. But I think we also need to keep in mind that we need to fulfill our duties to look at all of the elements of the project, including traffic impacts, the design of the utilities, the stormwater and septic, landscaping, and we really haven't delved too deeply into those issues yet. We have some peer review letters from Beta, but we haven't heard from Beta on those comments. So I think after tonight, we're going to have to, unless there's another change by the applicant, I think we're going to have to really dig in on the peer review, on these substantive design issues, So that's kind of where things stand. I think it's appropriate next, Mr. Chairman, to hear from Cliff as to what he presented at the meeting on December 13th, but also his current review of the project. There's been some very recent submittals as of Monday. I think there were a few more plans submitted on the building. So Cliff can speak to that as well. I actually think it would be better, Cliff, for you to speak to your more broader comments, and then hear from the applicant's architect about how he addressed those comments, and then maybe go back to you and continue that discussion.
That's fine. Cliff, that would be helpful to the board since we weren't there for the discussion to hear what your input was and what your suggestions were.
Sure. And Dan was pretty spot on. We covered, I think that what was most striking about the plan that we reviewed back then, which, as I said, there is a now modified plan that you'll see. It was really the scale of the building. It also had a very, and it says, if you've read my letter, I think one thing that was really striking about it was a kind of monumentality of it. It was 3 large, or 320-foot, like just to be precise, 3 120-foot long, virtually identical pieces separated by these tower elements. And I think from, so there was just that issue that I don't know this for absolutely sure, but I do state in my letter that I think at that length it could well be certainly the longest building in Norfolk. But I can't testify to that. I haven't measured all the buildings. I've done a pretty good Google Earth search, though. So it was the scale of it, and then the fact that it had no entry, really, from the street. Other than there was egress for one of the stairwells exited out onto the street, but it wasn't the primary entry. So it had a very wall-like quality to it. And I think what's interesting is that I think it is a very good site for housing. It's a short walk to a lot of amenities, a very short walk to the train. It's not over, I don't mean this in a bad way, it's not sort of overburdened by neighbors. There are many developments that try to plant themselves with close to a lot of neighbors. It doesn't have that hurdle to overcome. So we talked a lot about that. Where it ended up, as Dan said, was and it's attached to your letter, that for me, because the scale, specifically the length of the building, was the most problematic for me. I did a quick sketch. It may be, and I mentioned in that letter, it's a very sloppy sketch, but I'm not the architect for this project. So you can see underneath the proposed footprint of the building, and when Dan was talking about those 120-foot pieces, kind of blurry here, but it's basically thirds separated with these tower elements. What I suggested is that there would be less visual impact from the public realm if a long leg of the building actually was going north-south instead of east-west, so it's presenting an end elevation to the streets out here. Bridge is over there, that's east. It would present an end elevation. Then I suggested having a really strong entry piece on the street, and then the remainder of the program would be picked up in a much shorter building that would actually follow the street. The other elements that I thought could work with this, you probably all know there is an easement. I should point that out. There's an easement out front, which is what generates the curve in the building in the original proposal. I tried not to go into that plan. The other change in this was This plan did retain parking under the footprint, which I think is a smart way to do parking. That's in the proposed plan. But what I did was I pushed the parking back so that the usable outdoor space would be immediately adjacent to the building instead of separated by the parking. So it is what it is, a very quick conceptual sketch that would be a significant change in what was proposed. But I thought for the benefit of the public realm, I thought it was worth considering. I think some other, and I mentioned this in the letter, some other suggestions were, because it's still, even if in this scenario, it still is a large building for this town, that you could also mitigate the length of the building by perhaps having individual entries into the units that face the street is a pretty common way to activate the street. Maybe you put the largest units there so that the larger people have more children, don't have to be using elevators to go up and down in the building. They could go directly out onto the street, at least on the street side. It may not be clear, well, it's certainly not clear from this drawing, but the way the site works is it drops off in this direction. So by the time you're at the back of the site, you're a full story below the street grade, which is why you can put the parking. Parking works pretty well under the building in the proposed scenario, and I think it could work in this scenario too. So I think that was kind of the summary of what my concerns were. The designs are schematic. I think it's very normal at this stage of design to be in a schematic level. We don't have a sense of what the proposed materials are to the building. And I do mention in my letter that I think particularly when you get a building of this scale, the materiality really matters because it's a statement. It's making a big statement. So you certainly want a building that's clad in high quality, long-lasting materials that can be well maintained. I made, I mean, it's in the letter, but that was essentially the kind of bigger idea of how to work on the impact of the building from the street. Dan mentioned the design guidelines. I did review those design guidelines, and it's kind of interesting. I don't think they specifically, I think when you read those, you can see it's more about all the newer buildings that have been built very close to where we are now. And they talk a lot in there about making small-scale moves on the building because they relate to really pedestrian scale. The guidelines talk about breaking up the length of buildings into, I think they say, no longer than 40-foot pieces. And I think the project architect is going to present tonight. That was a change I did make, and I'll jump ahead quickly to that. But I think it's hard to kind of make a direct connection between those design guidelines and this building because the setting is very different. This isn't really a village kind of setting, and at least I read those guidelines as more kind of village setting kind of things. This is obviously just over the bridge from where you get into the more a village-like setting. My letter comments, as I said, so actually the first 5 or 6 paragraphs are recounting the working session that Dan was talking about that happened back in, I think it was December 13th. That's what the first half of the letter is. Then it goes on to comment on the drawings that I did get a couple days ago. And what's apparent from the drawings is that, and Dan said this already, but I'll repeat it, is that the developer didn't choose to make a large-scale site planning change, but instead focused on some of the other issues that we did talk about, largely the vertical scale of the building. The original proposal has 3 stacked floor plates, not counting the parking level, and then a roof that sits on top. The newer drawings that I think you'll see tonight that I saw a couple days ago proposed to put the top floor into the roof space. And if you do look in those design guidelines, you see a lot of the structures in those do show that kind of idea where you have two primary levels as kind of the base and body of the building, and then the roof that contains habitable space as well. So that certainly did address, from my perspective, it addressed a lot of the concern about the height of the building. The building still, by the time you get down to the eastern end of it, because the ground slopes off pretty quickly in this direction, by the time you're at that end, you're seeing the full height of the parking level as well as the full height of the structure at that end. So at that end, you've got parking level, 2 habitable floors, then the roof that in the current plan shows habitable space up within the roof that's made habitable by having dormers on it. There was another change, and I commented in the letter, which so I'll go over it quickly now, but I'm sure the architect will have more to say it. Dan was talking about these 120-foot long modules. They're in the new proposal that is broken, and that is the footprint is shifted so that it's not dimensioned, but it's probably something like 60 feet or maybe 70 feet and 50 feet. It's split so that it does help to break down the massing of those larger blocks. Another proposal that appears to be on the table at this point is dividing up the 3 pieces with bridge elements. They're shown as rendered as glass elements to help break up, to make a pretty clean break between those 3 separate pieces of the building. I think that covers most of what I said in the letter.
Yeah, Amy, do you have the design guidelines on your computer? It might be helpful to, are they on the website? Or
You emailed it to us.
It was sent to us,
By email? You emailed them to us, I think. Or, no, Rich did.
It's in the, if you go into the planning board land use, go into the P1.
Yeah, that would be worth looking at, because
this page?
especially that page, because you'll kind of see what I was talking about. It's talking about buildings in a kind of different way than what the conception of this building is. But there you go. What page are you on?
Page 7.
Yeah, that's it.
Rich sent it today, right? I got it today.
no, that's,
Yeah, that's any one of those. I think they're pretty similar diagrams. But what the design guidelines talk about are things that all of us kind of know about from living in New England, the way that bigger, more, but certainly public buildings, and this could be a mixed-use building. You're seeing, storefront-like elements down at the bottom. But it's notions of a more kind of aggregated look. So if it ever was a box, fundamentally, it's broken up by adding, these are those bay pieces. That's that 40-foot dimension I was talking about. It recommends on bigger buildings, breaking it up into pieces no greater than 40 feet. The guidelines talk a lot about a very traditional tripartite facade design. So there's a base, a body, and a top to the building, which is primarily done, it's done for proportioning and to help bring the building down to the ground more effectively, but it's very much in tune with the idea of a pedestrian scale of building. So there's a lot of visual activity right at the pedestrian level in the building. So, this look, breaking up the roofscape, so you have cupolas or dormers or other ways to take a big roof and really turn it into something that has a little more visual interest than a large unbroken roof might be. So I think the way the design guidelines, most of the examples in the design guidelines are, so you could see if this building if that's 40 feet and that's 40 feet, that's 80 feet. So maybe this building's 150 feet long, something like that. And that's kind of what it's focused on, is the degree of effort that you should put into breaking up a building that's 150 foot long. So it's that when I say that's different, when we're talking about this proposed building that's in front of you tonight, it's a whole different kind of story. It would essentially be almost 3 of these lined up, and what do you do in that scenario? And I think that is, if you're applying the design guidelines, that's the question you'd have to ask, is how does that apply to a building that you can't really walk all the way around, which is what this is about. The guidelines also talk about end elevations. They don't want the depth of the building. I think it's 40 or 50 feet. I don't remember that one, sorry. Is it 40 feet? That doesn't work for an apartment building. An apartment building is 60 feet wide. That's kind of planning standard width for an apartment building, especially when you park under it. You need, for double-loaded parking, you need 60 feet of width. So I think the effort of cleanly breaking that building up could be suggestive of another approach, that maybe it could be 3 separate buildings. It's not efficient from elevator use and various other system issues. But I think for me, if the guidelines apply, I think there should be discussion about how they apply to a building that you can't push that building into these guidelines. It really is a very different kind of scale. That's my opinion, at least. The author of the guidelines may have something to add to that. I'm not sure. Rich, that.
I'm not the author.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. So is that making sense? Okay.
I think this building, Cliff, can you scroll up a little bit, Amy, in that picture? I'm pretty sure that's the building next door, right? So, you know, I think that's what this schematic is based on. It looks like, at least. And so that just kind of gives you the sense of something of an appropriate scale for the town center versus something 3 times that size.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to it again, because as a designer, I like to think about kind of counter examples, because again, I think, to me, this is a walk-around building. This is a building that you probably park around behind it, and you can walk all the way around and experience all the elevations. But there are very long buildings that have tremendous visual interest. I would point out the south end of Boston. They're essentially one building that are 600 feet long, but there's a lot. If you can imagine what the south end looks like, it's this and then that and that and that and that. It's adequately subdivided that your first impression isn't, oh my God, this is the longest building I've ever seen, because there's enough visual interest and attention to proportioning scale of the added on pieces. So I'm only saying that because as a designer, I don't equate long with bad. It has challenges and opportunities in a long building. So as your peer reviewer, it's hard for me to just say, well, long buildings are impossible just because there hasn't been one this long in this town. But I do think it's worthy of discussion, just so you know what you're getting into as you dig deeper into your analysis.
Okay. Cliff, thank you very much. I think you made some very compelling reasons for us to take a good, long, hard look at the direction we go in. At this point, I think it would make sense to have who's going to be discussing the new plan. Have the applicant give us a preview of what they've come up with based on, I guess what we want to see now is, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you had that meeting and left the meeting, there was some consensus, and now there appears to be some backing away from the consensus, so I want to fill that gap.
I'm not sure if I agree with that completely. When we met, we were asked to consider whether it would be worthwhile to go back and redesign the whole site effectively for the two building. And what we had mentioned when we had met was, before I got involved in this project, there was actually a two-building design that had been before this board, not this board, the planning board, that wasn't well received for whatever reason. Again, I don't know the particulars, I wasn't there. And when we started this process, we didn't start it in a vacuum. Before we filed for our project eligibility letter, we had met with the town. We had met with the chairman of the zoning board. We had met with Rich. We had met with the fire chief, may have been there as well, just to kind of get some feedback as to where we were going with this and the challenges we had. So one of the concerns that were raised at that time was, how can we take advantage of the elevation of the site? Because, as you know, it goes from, it's a pretty steep site from front to back. And we came up with this one building design for a couple of reasons. Number one, from our opinion, we could achieve underground parking, and that was one of the things that really stood out to us. It was asked of us, how can you provide some covered parking? And the second concern was, we felt that even though this would be a three-story building, that the ramp would hide some of it. Now, I'm not an architect, so I can't tell you what it's all going to look like at the end. But when we left that meeting, we did vet it, and for a variety of reasons, it was decided not to further explore the two-building concept. And one of those reasons, I think we're further along with the site design in Beta's review and the traffic than we were when we first started. Don't forget, this project sat for a year and a half. And it was through no one's fault. I mean, you folks had 3 projects before you stayed. I get that. And one of the considerations is it was kind of unfair now to having gone through all this to now say, oh, now we want 2 buildings. But we didn't leave the meeting saying, no, we're not going to do anything. Cliff had brought up some good points at the meeting we had. And unfortunately, we ran into Christmas time, so we lost 2 weeks there for Christmas and New Year's. So we were not able to get further revised plans together. So our architect has been working on different concepts that were raised at that particular meeting that he has taken into consideration. Some of the comments that Cliff had raised, we've actually talked about here the last week or so. You just haven't had time to get pen to paper. So I think what makes sense right now is for Greg from ResCom, he's the architect, to discuss the changes to the buildings that he's seen. He's trying to incorporate some of the design guide elements. We're not ignoring it completely. And we just want to make sure we're steering in the right direction. I mean, we want a project that looks good and you guys can be proud of. So I think it makes sense for Greg to go into those things, and we can go from there. And keep in mind, these aren't final drawings. These are kind of working drawings as well. So we just want to try to steer it, and if the board's I don't know if I'll say happy, but satisfied with the direction we're going, we can take it to the next step. So if we come back here in a month or so, we have more detailed drawings that can be vetted, and Cliff and Greg can have some conversations in the meantime.
Good evening again, Greg Cerunian, ResCom Architectural. Excuse me. So I think Cliff summarized things very well from our discussion, as well as some of the points that he had sort of brought to our attention. And as Mike had mentioned, once we were sort of told by the developer that he'd like to look at options of maintaining the work that had been done, what could we look at to get closer to some of the things that Cliff had and we had talked about at our meeting. So if we could go to the slide that says example PDF. spin that. One of the things that Cliff was generous about was bringing some examples of projects that I guess he's been involved in or designed. And this picture sort of struck me, looking at it as an example of, here's a possible 3-building scenario. Obviously the streetscape here is different than ours, but it has some similarities. The other thing is, the breakup that we had talked about for the 3 stories, the 1, 2, and then the 3 in the roof. So it had some merit there. So looking at this, and I have no idea what the length of this building is. I'm sure these are shorter than ours, but it struck me as being, here's a good visual that that we could start looking at and modeling. These are obviously between the 2 buildings, open, you can walk around. So keeping our design, we looked at turning those into more bridges, as Cliff had mentioned, and make them much more transparent. So that was sort of the catalyst to take what we had done previously and how could we change it. So if we can go back to the slides. So let's go to, yeah, I think that one you had will be a good one. So here's our typical floor plate. Well, before we had a flat facade. What we're doing is we're breaking it up at the midpoint. It ends up being 60 feet, not 40. So we have a break, and then again more of a glass box. Another mass with a break and a break. Another glass box, and a break and a break. Those are cantilevered from the foundation so that it gives us a little chance to do something architecturally on the elevations, but also sort of preserves some of the issues that we had on the site planning. We did look at moving the parking in the back and flipping it, but again, certain characteristics of the site, we're going to prevent that. And Jamie can probably speak to that a little bit more. So if we go to one more slide. Maybe go to this one. Yep, there it is. Again, this is very preliminary. I think what this drawing lacks is all the detail that starts to break it up. This needs certainly further refinement. In Cliff's letter, he mentioned a lot of things that we could also look at. Some we had actually started looking at. So this has the potential to change, but I think the general big move concept is there. And then I just want to, I do have a before and after slide that I want to show you. Okay, I have it with me. I'm going to bring it up.
I think it's the last one in the floor plan one you had. I think it's the last sheet of that. Yeah, that one, SD.
Yeah, let's open that.
Go to the last page.
Yeah, there it is. Yep. So as you can see, this is the previous design where we had the 3 stories and then the roof, and then we had these sort of tower at the pivot points. This shows how we dropped the roof down. You were still able to maintain decks, which adds some depth to the elevation. These become the sort of the glass blocks. Our goal was to maybe even reduce those a little bit more in scale so that the buildings have a little more relief. And then we want, one of the things we were going to look at ourselves, and Cliff actually had mentioned it, was the possibility of trying to get some stepping between the buildings that to make the buildings a little more unique. So that's kind of a big picture. Again, it needs work, it needs refinement, but I think what we're looking for tonight is a consensus if this should be continuing in this direction or if we have other issues. Questions?
Okay, Greg, thank you. First of all, I think some of the revisions you've made are an improvement over what you originally started with. Personally, I like the reduction of the roof line. I think that helps. The dividing up of the buildings certainly helps. So you're making some improvements that I think overall are helpful. My main question that Cliff brought up is the massing of the building. I don't know if we've gotten away from the massing of the building. And Cliff, I know architecture is in the eye of the beholder, but I'm not an expert on this, but the massing issue still seems to be unresolved. Is that a fair statement?
Well, Greg did show that example of that development that's in Belmont, and I think that is an example where you can have a long building and still have it be attractive. That's right on the western end of Belmont. So I think where he is right, these buildings aren't quite as long, and there are individual entries into the building. That's one thing I was mentioning before, so that it is more. It helps to connect with the street. That's a very large retaining wall with stairs that come down from that terrace down to the street level. So, again, it's the. Well, I guess as far as connecting, and Greg pointed that out fairly, there is a difference because he is proposing to connect those buildings. Actually, the space between the buildings that are proposed, the spaces are larger than I think these spaces are. So I think, I guess what I would say, I'm kind of with you, and you read that in my letter, I'm sure that if you take it as a given that for whatever reasons you can't look at a radical change in the site plan, and I'm not suggesting that it's the right idea to not look at that. I personally still do think there is a better site plan. But if you do if for whatever constraints you can't do that, then I think there's just a lot more work that has to happen in design development, and I know Greg knows that, and I think it's a lot of what is really the impression that buildings give people is from the detail, how fine-grained is the detail, so that it doesn't just look like a big box that somebody didn't put a lot of time into making it really look attractive. So it's the way I hope I'm not sounding evasive, but to me the proof is in the drawings. That's what I mean about there's nothing inherently wrong with long. It depends on what it looks like, and that's kind of what we're talking about. For me, getting the top habitable floor into the roof is critical. I think whether it ends up only 2 modules long with one that goes north-south or stays 3 and steps down, that to me is a critical move. I think before it really, really looked foreign, and it is it's kind of an entry piece into that downtown when you're coming from the west, approaching the bridge. It's a big deal. This building, it's going to leave it's really big. So I think whether you work it out by very fine-grained detail to convincingly work it out, or whether you work it out or give yourself an easier problem, I think is what I'm saying, is that a shorter building is a much easier problem to solve as a designer than a much longer building. Because I think it's clear and you can see in these buildings, it's even some of the differentiation is only by color, but it still makes a difference. So, between adding color, adequate level of detail, enough differentiation, breaking up large-scale symmetry and things like that that help bring buildings out of monumental into a more of a residential reading is, I think, where this project wants to go. But you can't have everything. A big building will always be a big building. So to your question, is massing solved? Certainly fixing the roofscape, getting the top floor into the roof is a critical element. It's the right idea. Whether you can solve the problem by leaving those buildings connected with glass bridges, I don't know. And I don't think Greg knows at this point. He's just started on that exploration.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, the reason I had started with this slide, as Cliff had mentioned, it's in the details. And, the time that we had once we were, sort of given direction. I think this is a good example of, a drawing versus, what it really is going to look like. I'm curious if we put the drawing of this building up that was, when these were done, to see what that drawing looked like to what's actually built. So I do think that our building has a long way to go to get to this level of detailing, but that was our intent. The other thing Cliff had mentioned is in his letter that the entries, the that easement that is there makes that very difficult, as well as the grading. There's a potential for it to happen on the left side. But to have that happen further down, it's extremely difficult. This is sort of an interesting slide again, because the scale of this is from the street. From our street would be here, and it's still the grade starts to goes down, but the road is up here. So it's kind of it's an interesting site. So even the scale of this is different because, of that line.
Thank you. Dan, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a couple comments. So I think in terms of the applicability of these design guidelines, they're not law. They're not something they're asking for waivers from, but they are something that the board can consider and think about in terms of what makes a good design for a project like this in this location. And I mean, to your point about resolving massing, resolving other issues, and yeah, I don't think you're ever going to resolve everything, and nor should you. I don't think the objective of this project is to get a project that completely conforms to these guidelines. That's not going to happen, but I think the idea is to get a project that is consistent with the guidelines and meets the spirit of them. So to that end, I think that what can be helpful for the applicant moving forward is getting feedback from the board members as to whether you think pursuing something that tries to meet these is a good thing, or if you're indifferent about it. My advice, and I think Cliff's advice, is that a project like this should try to achieve some level of consistency with the guidelines, and but that's ultimately something that you should give some direction to the applicant. Cliff and I have worked on a couple projects together in Brookline with similar kind of design challenges, and what's been effective, I think, in those projects, in those hearings, is very often the board would, the chair would take a poll of the members and ask what everyone is thinking at a given time, and then that's really helpful for the applicant to hear and then to take the next step, because I'm sure these guys are sitting here tonight thinking, what do I do next? And should I pursue this? Should I make tweaks? Should I separate them? I mean, so the more we can help him figure out what steps to make, the better. If you feel strongly that this project should have gone along the lines of what Cliff had suggested breaking up the building, breaking up this into two buildings with, one facing north-south or one running north-south, then certainly give your opinion. It's not controlling, but it's I think useful for everyone to hear.
The sketch that I did could be one building, too, an L-shaped building. So I think it matters, because I know from a design perspective, you're talking about how many cores do you need, how many elevators, so it does make a difference. I think you can make that type of building and cut back on the length of the footprint in an L-shaped single building, so.
All right, good. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Cliff. I think what I'd like to do is open it up to opinions and ideas from the other members of the board at this time. I will go on the record as saying I'm intrigued by this concept that you folks discussed in your work session, whether it's one building in an L-shaped format. I think it accomplishes many of the goals set forth in the design guidelines. I think it reduces the massing significantly. Again, kudos to the team for that, reducing the third floor. But again, if you want some feedback, my perception is that this type of a design is, I'm very intrigued by this. I'd very much like to see you folks come back with some conceptual designs that reflect the thought process that went into this. And having said that, I'll open it up to for comments from other members of the board.
Just going to say that I agree with you. I'm intrigued by it also. Is this discussion about reducing any number of units, Cliff?
That wasn't the intent.
Okay. Could they still maintain the amount of units in that type of a change?
I think so.
Okay.
You know, that sketch, again, it's just a sketch.
Okay.
But I think I was careful to make sure I maintained the same radial
Right.
footprint.
Right, 'cause I know that would be a concern. I assume that would be a concern of theirs if there's going to be a change in.
It would be a big concern.
Right.
Yeah, Joe, it's unlike almost every other 40B project I've worked on, there isn't a desire here to reduce the density, and that's not, because this is a good site for housing, as Cliff mentioned, it's right next door
I
to the
agree.
commuter rail.
That's the same. That's why I'm
So,
intrigued by the
yep.
design as well, but I'm wondering if we're immediately starting to cut down on their ability to.
I hope not.
I hope not. Okay, good. So I agree with Mike.
Yeah, hope not.
I remember that that conceptual sketch doesn't really define how far east-west you have to go.
Mhm.
Right? The north-south, you're constrained more on the north-south wing because of needing to get into that building for parking. So that could end up shorter and you add it on the east-west running way. But it would still be significantly shorter than the proposed.
Devin?
So I guess, with the 40B projects that I've personally been a part of with this board, the projects I think at least I've dealt with for the most part, really haven't been architecturally driven. I think with this project, more or less the architecture of the building really drives the site design, as opposed to, really the other 40B projects we've dealt with. I think maybe it was hindsight that the architectural review took this, we waited this long to really dive deep into the architecture. I think that sketch that, Cliff provided really provides a good starting point to, investigate different ideas of what could be done on the site. And really in such an important area right at town center, I really think it's important to look at some other ideas for massing of the building. And my opinion is I do think we should investigate different ideas for the building.
To the applicant, does the, you talked about the glass wall in front of the bridge. Does that extend the entire length of the buildings? I mean, from not from one end to the other? Does it create a longer stretch? Or does that have any impact on the total length?
No.
There's no change?
No, the glass is in between the
It
buildings.
just adding glass.
Yeah, and the idea was to sort of make three distinct looking buildings opposed to one long building.
Don, go ahead.
I have to echo some of the comments that you guys have already made. It's an ideal site, and I've always just felt that the original structure as presented just looked, we use the word mass, to me, massive. And anything that could be done to try to mitigate the look of it from the vantage point of its large size by breaking it up into, building running north-south or breaking it up into actual individual buildings, I think would be a positive thing relative to the perception. And as you said, Devin, as you drive into Norfolk from the, I guess that's the south, it's the first thing you're going to see. So I think that you used the word intriguing. So, Mike, I would echo that. I think it's very intriguing, and I would urge the developer to look at a design change that would afford a better view from the outside.
Thank you, Don. Josie?
I also feel the same way. I am looking at this as an opportunity to improve the look of, not only the look of the building, but forgive me if I'm mistaken, is there a slope toward the end of that lot? Is there a slope?
Yes.
Okay. So in the decline of elevation, and you're breaking up that building a little bit, I think it's, it'd probably make that building more, if it's broken up a little bit, more structurally sound, and probably would be more cost efficient as far as pouring footings and establishing foundation. I think that what you may think that you're losing on the front end as far as design and added cost, you may surprisingly find it to be less expensive, in addition to being more aesthetically appealing. So, and it would be more structurally sound. So.
Okay. Ian, did you want to kind of wrap this up for us?
Yeah, so I think we've beaten this to death. They've gotten the feedback. I don't think there's anything more tonight to talk about in terms of architecture. Do you guys want to talk about civil site design, any stormwater septic utility issues?
I think so. We have Jamie Bissonette here, and I thought I saw Philip from Beta. So what I'd like Jamie to do is kind of, when we were here last, we had made some changes to the design of the site, and Beta hadn't had the opportunity to opine on it. And since that time, they issued a letter. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there was also some back and forth with respect to the landscaping and traffic. So I think those are important parts that we should at least discuss, because I think those are pretty close to being wrapped up in whatever form of the building is here.
The landscape, I think it was there we go. I think that's the one. Yep, that should be. Turn it 90.
All right. Good evening, Jamie Bissonette, Zenith Consulting Engineer. Beta did a thorough review on the landscaping, and they asked us to change out a couple of the species in the island areas, add some additional plantings to the front entryway, provide more screening to the MBTA rail, add a little bit of vegetation over on the side as well, and to the entrance. All of which we've done. They also wanted some directly on the north side of the building the stone areas. It is dead north with the building, so they're gonna get very little light, so we discussed that with them. We also talked to them about some grasses and things like that, so we have, just about every comment worked out with them. They've issued a letter. The only thing that they'd like us to do at this point is to, potentially work in a couple of native species along the back wall. We're proposing Leland cypress in anticipation of the 40B that's going behind us. It's gonna require a lot of tree removal for that site. So we're just looking to provide some natural screenage to our site. Can you open up the septic design? We'll go over that really quickly. We were also asked to submit septic design, which we've done. Perfect. Have to do the same thing. Perfect, there we go. So, again, the grade area is the building. We show the drainage basins on site, the maintenance building towards the back, and then the septic with the reserve areas as shown. What we're demonstrating here, and by showing this to you, is just the size that the utilities take up under the ground for infiltrating with sewer and drainage of water and everything else. It takes up a large portion of our site. But this site has advanced treatment. It's also a Presby, which is an innovative and alternative technology. And we're utilizing a BioClear system up in here with recycling to promote the bacterial growth and the breakdown of the wastewater strength. There's a ton of details in here, but overall, we've resolved just about all of the site issues with Beta. I believe that they just have a couple of minor things to take place prior to construction, but besides that, I think we've worked through all of the regular site issues, and I believe the Board of Health is in the process of starting the review on the septic. So like Mike said, I think civil-wise, we're pretty much there. I don't know if Todd wants to add anything to that.
Thank you. Todd Unzus, Beta. Yeah, I'm in general agreement. The civil site review is essentially wrapped up. I think perhaps the only comment that I would make note of is we had asked the applicant for originally for a kind of a excavation, how many yards of material would be coming out of the site. They provided that number, which is a big number. It's several thousand yards, and that will require numerous truck trips to and from to bring in gravel. And our suggestion was that they simply coordinate with both the town and any abutters to try to minimize any noise impacts from the numerous truck trips. In addition, we just wanted to get clarity on whether the volume of fill material included the excavated material that's going to be excavated for the proposed septic system location. It's a very large field, and we just weren't sure if that number was also taken into account. Other than that, like Jamie said, I think that the civil site issues have been addressed.
Thank you. Do we have the numbers on what's coming out, what's going in yet? I missed that. I'm sorry. Do we know exactly what the cut and fills are and all that kind of good information?
Yeah, it's like 6,600 yards
Of fill.
of fill.
Is that the net number? Is that the net number? Okay, but what's the export for the, so all the dirt that's coming out for the septic, is that gonna be all exported out, or is that gonna be recycled on site? Okay. Is there an existing septic on the property? Absolutely. So is that a large field that, is all that soil gonna be coming out and exported off, or?
Well, you know, the stone from that may have to be exported from the stone and
Do you have any numbers as to what the export will be? How many truck trips will be? No, overall for the site. Truck trips coming out, truck trips coming in. Do you want
I
that?
believe my estimate was just based off a standard trailer dump was several hundred.
So Jamie, maybe if you could provide that for the next meeting.
Yeah, you're right, you did say require hundreds.
Right.
Okay, what else do we need to cover?
Joe, you had a question, I have a question as well, but do you want to start?
I was just gonna say, I mean, we're talking about also possibly looking at a redesign of some sort, and how much that applies to what they're looking at now for septic and truck trips and all that. Are we able to base what they're saying now and based on what we may see next?
Well, they have a right to stick to their plan that they have, and so after tonight, their client's not here.
Right.
So they have to go back, talk to the boss, and the boss is gonna decide whether to stick with what they've currently got or move in a different direction. So it's really not up to us, it's up to them.
So one of the elements that I don't think would change is traffic, because even if we were to shift, I think our driveway has to stay where it's at. So I think the traffic component's good. Is that a fair statement?
Can we, before we get to traffic, because I have some comments on that, but
Okay.
can we just wrap up the septic? And I had a couple questions on
Go
that.
ahead.
So, Rich, where are we with the review by the Board of Health? Because that's something that we all need to talk about in a broad scope, independent of the project, but, so we're all on the same page for future projects. But is Wade looking at the plan?
So yes, so Wade is going to be doing the septic system review for the project, and we will be that'll be done through the department, our land use department budget. One of the things that not all you'd be familiar with, but of the 40B projects that had come in previously, Boyd's Crossing, Lakeland Farms, trying to think what was before that. Actually, Abbeville and
Rockwood Road.
Rockwood Road. The Wade had done a septic system review, and that was done and paid for through the town. And Wade is the appointed Board of Health agent for the Board of Health in the town of Norfolk. So he's the one that does the plan reviews and stamps the approvals on behalf of the Board of Health as the appointed Board of Health agent. So what I discussed with Dan, for this project and then going forward, is that the septic system component of the 40B projects really should be going through the Board of Health, and he'll do the review report to the ZBA on the system itself and waivers and so forth, and then not have it going through the consultant to the board, because ultimately if the project gets approved, it gets submitted to the Board of Health. When they go for the building permit stage, he's going to do another review potentially, so there could be duplication or there could be conflicting review relative to it. So I think going forward, and for this one, he'll do the review, so that way he reviews at this stage. When it comes in on the back end, he's already seen it, and it should move things along much quicker because it's not as if he hasn't seen it before. We are paying for this through the department budget because that has been the case in prior situations with the other 40Bs. What we want to do going forward, what I would suggest is that when the plans come in, I would get a proposal quote from Wade to do the review and get a fee from the applicant to pay for those costs. Wade is not a town Norfolk employee. He's a consultant who is acting as the Board of Health agent. So we pay for him on a consulting basis. He's not a municipal employee of the town Norfolk. So I just wanted to let you know going forward how we should approach this particular one and going forward, so we're not, and not to belabor the point, but it did become more of an issue budgetary wise in the past, so we kind of got over that hurdle. So I think there's a good system going forward.
Yeah,
Not duplicate matters.
And I think going forward, it would make sense when we're developing the scope of services for Beta or for whoever the civil engineer is, that we carve out the septic part of it and then make sure the applicant pays for the septic review. It's just, instead of paying Beta, they would be paying Wade and whoever Wade uses. But for this project, Beta's looked at it, Wade's gonna look at it anyway because it's within their jurisdiction. One of the things I wanna make sure we get covered in peer review, Todd, and with Wade is, the most important piece of information the board can get from peer review is your opinions on the waiver requests. And you guys have heard me say this many times before, but the most important function of the zoning board in 40B is to look at the waiver requests, and because that's really the meat of it. That's why they're here, is to get waivers, and so you need to know from your experts, whether or not any of these waivers presents any public health, safety, environmental, or planning issue, and design issue for that matter. And so it helps us to get information from our experts as to what they think about those waivers. So that's something at the next, and I haven't looked at the Beta letters yet, but we should make sure that that's covered in your letters and any other letters that we get from Wade and Concom and so forth.
We would have done it preliminarily when we filed. However, we didn't have a design at the time. So depending on where this whole thing gets steered, I either need to update my waiver list or and have Jamie update it as well, because now he knows what a septic system design is, to see if we do need waivers from it. I don't know. So I think, from my perspective, an updated waiver list for you folks, whatever direction this goes, is what we should have you for the next meeting, whenever that is, and I think we can do that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Mike and I actually talked about this today, about the need for an updated waiver list. And keep in mind too, the waivers aren't just from the substantive provisions; it's also the process provisions. And Norfolk is, somewhat unique in having a very robust regulatory process for septic systems and stormwater systems. So if you're asking for any waivers from the review process, such as the testing that you need to do for septics, now is the time to tell us, because this ordinarily would be the time that we would require that testing. And for other 40B projects that we're working on now, we are requiring some testing to go forward where there's a justification for that, particularly when there's wetland resources, which I don't think is really the case here. But all right, so we've talked about septic. We've got the peer review letter. We'll get a waiver list at the next meeting. Mr. Chairman, I had a few comments on traffic.
Go right ahead.
I think even though your traffic engineer is not here, I think it's worthwhile for me to get my comments out just to keep things moving. Has Bill Scully come to a meeting yet to discuss traffic?
Yes.
All right, so I think it would make sense maybe for the next meeting to have that meeting dedicated to traffic. And our traffic engineer, is it Tyler from Beta?
Correct.
Okay, so maybe have him come to the next meeting. And the issues that I have, I'll just touch on them briefly. First, what the board received in terms of a traffic study was actually not even a study. It was a 10-page letter. It wasn't even a traffic impact assessment report, which is normally what we get for projects of this size and scale. And just for a point of comparison, what we've gotten for Abbeville and for the Seekonk Street projects are true traffic impact assessment studies, which the scope of those studies is actually something that's dictated by the Mass Department of Transportation, and most traffic engineers know what they need to include in these traffic studies. So what you got was really a very streamlined kind of memo that touches on the areas, but didn't really provide you with a lot of depth. So I just wanted to point that out. And a couple of my concerns related to site distances. This project, so the traffic engineer for the developer is Bill Scully, who's been before this board before on other projects, including the Enclave and Abbeville. So on site distance, the first piece of information you need to have is the speed on the road, because the site distance that's required, the minimum site distance to be safe, depends on how fast the traffic is. The standard is 85th percentile speed. That data was not collected for this project. There was data from 2017 that Bill Scully has, and he provided that. But 2017 is more than 2 years old, and if you recall, in the Seekonk Street project, we actually required the developer there to get new speed counts because their counts were old. So I think there's an issue with respect to the staleness of their speed data, and their speed data, according to Bill Scully, actually only included one direction, not both. I think it was eastbound and not westbound, or westbound or not east. I can't remember which one it is, but one of those directions was not provided. And so anyway, that's the first issue I wanted to raise. Is I think that the speed data is incomplete for the study. The second issue is the assumptions with respect to the vertical site distance. Site distances assume a level roadway, and that was a comment that Tyler made in his report. Bill didn't really address that in his response, and the issue here is that if you look east to the town center, you're going over the railroad tracks, and that there's I think a relatively significant elevation change from the project driveway up to the bridge. And when you're on the bridge, if you're in a car and you're 3.5 feet up from the road, you can only see so much ahead of you because of that vertical difference. And that wasn't addressed by Bill in his report. He's assuming that he has 350 feet of sight distance in that direction, which may be true, but what you normally get from a developer's traffic study is site triangles. You actually get a plan, and we're in the thick of this right now in Seekonk Street. As you guys know, we've got all these plans now showing the site triangles and the site distances in each direction. We don't have any of that here, and I think from my layperson's perspective, I think what we really should be looking at is the site distance looking towards that bridge and getting confirmation that there is adequate site distance between the driveway and the bridge. So that, just pass that along to you folks.
Dan, is it your recommendation to the board that Bill come prepared with a traffic impact assessment between now and the next meeting, and the information that we need on the verticals?
Yeah, I think he needs to address at least those site distance issues. I don't know if it needs to be a full-out traffic impact and assessment study that meets the criteria of what Mass DOT requires. I don't know if that's necessarily required for this project, but I think there's certain components that I think are missing.
Okay.
There's no history of crash data. If you look at a scope of these studies, there's like 10 things that they're check the box kind of things, and Bill hasn't really addressed all of them. He's addressed some of them.
All right. Mike, did you capture all that?
I'm trying. I'll have to watch the video if I didn't.
There's a picture behind you there.
Yeah. Where'd that come from?
That's Green International's report.
Okay. Yeah, so again, he's showing 350 to the bridge, but I went on Google Street View. It's amazing what he can get these days online, and the cars, the cameras that capture those pictures, if you ever seen them on the road, they're cars with these poles on the roof, and that's where the camera is. So you got to look at it from where you're sitting, not way up there. But even up there, if you go on Google Street View on your computer and you position yourself on the bridge looking this way, you'll see what I'm saying. It's not completely evident that you would be able to see an object here. And that's what stopping sight distance is. It's whether or not this car traveling over this bridge can see an object in the road here and have enough time to stop to avoid it. So.
All right, so waivers and traffic should full evening, and we'll be interested to hear what Greg comes back with.
Yeah, I think for the next meeting, traffic would be the prime agenda item, and then I think follow up on design. And I think maybe flushing out, I personally would like to maybe get a follow-up letter from Cliff addressing the project's conformity or non-conformity with the town center design guidelines. You all have expressed, I think, a desire to have this project address those, and so I think having Cliff maybe run through them and make some comments about how and when, or how and where they comply and don't, would be helpful for us to have on the record. And Cliff made a lot of comments tonight, so it's just a matter of putting that in writing and submitting that.
Okay, all right. Waivers, are you and Mike gonna be prepared to start discussing waivers at the next meeting, or?
I don't think that makes sense. I think what we need is a revised waiver list, and then that needs to go to our peer review consultants, and then they need to provide you with an opinion on those.
So the focus will be traffic and design again, okay.
One clarification, I know, Cliff, in your letter, you're talking about a different entranceway than what we're seeing, like, you adding an entrance or a different entrance?
In the revised plan where the entrance was shown,
Right.
is, I think, the right place. If you're pursuing that design, that's, I think, the right place to do it.
Places it's always been.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I was reviewing just what was in front of me, basically. And it doesn't mean that, you know, I mean, the sketch I did, the entry was closer to the driveway, but
Okay.
but it kind of has to be
Your
that way.
sketch was
'Cause
showing a bit of a different spot.
that's right, because because the leg of the building that goes north-south in that sketch is much narrower
Right.
than one of the long legs, but it still happens at a knuckle in the building.
I'm just noting there's a slight difference in the entranceway based on what Cliff has given us.
So if I can just comment on Cliff's design, he actually has a drive under.
I know.
So you gotta go, you know,
Right, so I just want to make sure that, how's that apply to
Right.
what we're asking them to do? is what
Yeah.
I'm asking.
Well, again, it's their prerogative if they want to make a change or stick with their current design. And right now, we have to assume we're going to go with their current design. If
Not that they're that far apart in terms of the break of the road, but, okay, very good.
Excuse me. I have a couple things that I need to clear up. First of all, you made a comment, Cliff, about you need 60 feet of width for parking underneath the building. Is
Yeah.
the current one that I don't have any dimensions on the current ones that were laid out. Is that?
It's probably 60 feet, right?
it's either 60 or 65.
Okay.
68.
68, okay.
And
That's
the other
extra wide.
question was, as you move, I don't know which direction it is, towards the town center where the elevation drops quite a bit, and we're talking about trying to break up the building from an optic perspective, is there any value to putting, like, making that another story so that, because it's lower, so.
Well, it already is, that because the parking level, you see by the time you're at the eastern end of the building, you can see it in that elevation.
Mhm.
The parking level is exposed at that end, whereas at the other end, it's less visible because of the natural slope of the site.
I guess what I don't know anything about architecture, but if that building, if the parking level were also under, as it is in the first two buildings,
Mm-hmm.
all right, is there a way that then that particular building could be maybe one level higher so as to take some of the units from the other
Oh, I see what you mean.
buildings?
To shorten the footprint
Yes,
of the building.
Yes, sir. I don't know.
We actually considered that. It's a little tricky, just because of the number of units and trying to get it to work. It's not out of the question. Again, like I said, we've got other things we want to explore that we just didn't have time.
Thank you.
I mean, some of the concerns with the site planning is driving the footprint, setbacks and, the square footages he needs for the drainage and the septic. So, when we looked at this initially with Cliff, those were some of the concerns right away from the site engineer that, as we get closer down, there's the wetlands down, no one, what's the setback, the drainage, you know, maintaining the setbacks to the drainage, so, you know, it wasn't just an arbitrary thing. We didn't want to do it. It was just, it was very challenging and, you know, may not even be possible. But that was sort of the direction.
What setbacks are you referring to?
What was the drainage?
What was the what?
Can we go to your, please ask, you know, what the far rate of the site? If we put, yes, yeah, so if you went to the engineering plan, by putting the building on the far left of the site, then you have to shift drainage and septic down. And he wasn't able to get, I think, the offsets that he needed to the drainage with the septic. Wasn't- Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're not really sure if we do L-shaped building, if we can get drainage or septic to work. Is it work? We're not sure if it'll work or not, is the long and short of it. When we looked at it with Cliff the day of the meeting, the inherent thought was we weren't going to be able to fit the septic and the drainage in that space and get it to work because of the proximity. Setback restrictions, infiltration basin, and in a septic system. And that's when the discussion of the town drainage came in. And so we had that discussion, but like Dan had said, we're kind of directed by the proponent of the project which way to go. You know, as far as the site design is concerned, we're just done with getting sign off. So to tell him that he's got to redesign the entire site is not an easy challenge on our end. But I think that's what we would have to do to see if it could work. I mean, you literally have to redesign the whole site to do so. And it may or it may not work. Getting to us, some of the concerns we have is along the left-hand side of the building, trying to get the water to work. And then making sure we can get the septic and get the drainage on the town lot. I believe we can on the town lot. But getting the septic to work is going to be another thing. But we may be able to get it all to work. It may even be easier. I don't know.
If I guess, if you start going down the road of changes like this, just make sure that the fire chief's on board with it.
Oh, yeah, we would definitely have to. Yep. Yeah, making the turn around the L shape of the building, we talked with Cliff about it. That, to me, that was the first thing that popped out, was being able to turn and actually get into the building. But again, like he said, it's a sketch. You know, it would have to be played with.
No, I know.
Yeah.
What I don't want to happen is, you know, if you were to go down that path,
Yep.
to, you know, get to a good point, then all of a sudden find out that, you know, the fire chief doesn't like the design.
Good point. Good point.
And just to respond, Jamie, on your point that's been made a couple times tonight about you guys are almost done with your review of the civil design. I think there's still stuff to do. I mean, I think the board's really going to want to hear from the town's health department as to the septic, and I think we haven't even touched on traffic. So I know you have a letter from Beta on that, but there's still, I think, a lot of work to do, and I think you know, maybe the horse is put behind the cart where it should have been. I mean, the timing wise and all this effort that's gone into it is, you know, it's a shame to lose that effort, but I think the board is sending a message that it wants to make sure this gets done right and the design is right. So there is some balancing there, but just so I think I'm speaking for the board to say that we appreciate you guys have done a lot of work on the site design, but there's still a lot of work to do, and we still have some time to do it. And just on that point, Amy, do you know where we are on the, what?
March 4th.
March 4th, okay, so we're fine.
Okay, so our next public hearing will be March 4.
Oh,
No,
no, that's when the 100.
that's the
Oh,
deadline.
the 100, oh, okay, so, oh, jeez, that's the 180.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
Is that drainage easement for the town? Like, is that locked in that place? Like, is the potential to look at some different, you know, paths that could take, if that's providing a restriction?
I'm going to turn it to the attorney because that's out of my.
There's an easement to the town as part of a taking, and there's a drain line in that easement. So if it was simply just using that easement to shift water down to a drainage point, I think it's okay. But there's a line in there from what I know, so, and it's fairly deep. I think some of the manholes are like 12 feet deep, 14 feet deep, so it's way down there. So to add new pipe or something like that is kind of, I think it's a big ask.
You're going up the hill, closer to the MBTA property?
We're going from the MBTA up to Main Street and picking up, I believe, the catch basins that are further up Main Street.
I just mean if you shifted closer, if the line were to shift closer to the MBTA property, that actually would be an even deeper cut, right? I'm trying to open up.
Yeah, it would, if we were gonna put it closer to the, to Main Street, I think would, but again, the same thing, we have that steep slope from Main Street coming down onto our site.
We did locate that structure, by the way.
We did, we found the drainage, yeah, it took a couple days, but we got it.
Now I'm curious, where did it end up?
It ended up about 12 feet off of the plans on record.
For better or worse?
For us, for better, it fell right in the middle of the easement, and the differential on the pipe coming in and the one going out, there's about a 12-foot drop. So but it's a deep manhole, like Mike said. Nothing, it's just deep. We found the one right in the middle of our site.
All right, comments, questions from folks in the audience?
Chris Henry, 30 Boardman. Can we put up the plan that shows the buildings and it showed like a house in the back corner, like a maintenance shed of some sort that I hadn't seen previously, and was the the above looking down on it,
I'm sorry, Ray.
Photo or drawing?
No, it's the one with the
the
red.
drawing
The red hash. Oh,
that Jamie showed, yeah.
And then he said there's a maintenance building back there.
Right there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
back one.
Yep.
So in that back corner there, those two squares, does that building meet setbacks, or are you asking for variances or waivers there as well?
I think we requested a waiver. Again, this has been here for well over a year and a half, but if it didn't comply with zoning setbacks and a waiver was needed, it would have been requested.
But that'll be listed within the waiver request?
If it isn't, it would.
Okay. And then the other rectangle that's right next to that, where's the dumpster located? That's my question. Inside. Okay, so previously it was, so they've moved it in the building. Okay. So I think I echo a lot of the comments that were made by the board that, this is a super important site. This is the gateway to Norfolk as you come into town. The impact of how this building looks is going to be huge on the downtown. I think when you pair it with the 25 Rockwood Road, which is sort of directly behind this, that is going to be 7 acres that are going to be virtually completely clear-cut, that look through there is going to be significantly changed. So I want to make sure that you guys are, doing our best here to really drill down on this design, because I think it's critical. Thank you.
Martha Henry, 30 Boardman Street. I have two questions. One is to Attorney Hill. I saw the front end of your presentation before I was able to get here. What is the board's sort of leverage around the design that we don't see? We don't always have so much leverage. So could you just reiterate that so the public understands that you had read part of the law or something, just so I understand how much leverage is there really around breaking up the building, not this massive... Yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't really leverage per se, it was more, I was just stating the standard. So the standard for the board's job under 40B is to weigh the need for housing against local concerns. And the statute defines local concerns as including the need to promote better site design and building design, as well as preserve open spaces, to protect the environment, to protect public safety and health. So my point was that the design of a site, the design of buildings, is one of the things that the legislature intended boards to be looking at when it's looking at 40B projects. It's typically something that boards in more urban environments look at traditionally. You know, Devin made a point that, you know, this is a unique project in Norfolk, and that the architecture is driving the design of the site, and it's absolutely true. And in more urban environments, this happens all the time. And so that was basically an introduction to the fact that we have, thanks to the efforts of staff here in Norfolk, we've got a book now that is a design guideline for Norfolk Town Center, and this is directly applicable, even though maybe not legally binding, but it's applicable to this project. And so that's the kind of thing which I was talking about in terms of what the board can look at for guidance, as well as what the developer can look at in terms of thinking about how to design the building and the site.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, the town, using the town catchment, or I don't know the proper, yeah, the stormwater, was that just recent, or has that been through the entire project? And how does that work? I thought we didn't give away our...
You're talking about the
stormwater and
that goes off-site?
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is that runoff goes off-site under current conditions, and so that what we had discussed at the staff meeting on March 13th is, you know, not doing anything that we're not doing today, but exploring other options to treat stormwater that might free up space in the site to shift buildings around. But, I mean, I don't know, Jamie, can you
Are those connected, I guess, is... So is that connected for the board, that we can you can use this stormwater option if you take the design suggestions?
Yeah, I think...
Right, not, you can have that even if you don't take the suggestions?
Well, I believe they already discharge runoff currently into a municipal system, but Jamie can speak more about that than I can.
Yeah, right now, we have 2 catch basins on site that are into the easement that the town and runs down into the municipal system.
Which is behind the site, right?
That's where the drainage
on the
from
Medway
our site
branch,
goes
is that
down.
where it is?
I guess the question we're asking is there a specific number of gallons, let's say, that you are allotted to this lot presently? And then are you asking for additional?
I'm not aware of a specific amount of gallons that have been allotted, but again, I'm not aware of any agreement that would...
I just thought usually lots were, like, they say X number of gallons is per lot allowed to go into. Like, I know that the building that's on the corner of Boardman and Main Street has an allotment from the town through a previous agreement saying X number of gallons. Is there a similar agreement with this lot?
Yeah.
Rich, could you shed some light on this? Thank you.
So I'll probably defer to Jamie on a few points, but just generally speaking, the right now the existing site, which the drain line that's in the front of the building, is tied into and flows into the town drainage system. The design that you have, I think that you've shown here, actually removes drainage from the town system. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you're actually doing on-site drainage. Right. So they're decreasing. The comparison to the one on 201 Main Street and then the 220, those two sites were as part of a memorandum of agreement or understanding, actually, to tie into that system. So that's why those are being added to it. So that's when it came back in October to modify the permit for the town. These were already, as part of the overall drainage improvement for the Norfolk Town Center, this was one site that already was in the system, so it's already flown into it. There's a couple other sites where there's essentially property that are flowing into the town existing condition. So the notion of this, well, that potential redesign
Yeah.
was if the tying, keeping the flows the same, before and after, I guess, match the flows in and out, would free up more space, then that would be an option to make it an overall better design. And then the idea of this potential tie-in, instead of, it would tie into the pipe that runs through the Medway branch, which is 30-inch diameter pipe. This pipe here that's in front actually surcharges a little bit. It doesn't come out of the manholes, but from a calculation standpoint, you can't put any more into that, so it actually would probably could be an overall system benefit by reworking the drainage and tying into the town. That's my perspective, but generally that's kind of the overall about it.
So all the redesign and the moving of soil and in and out doesn't change how much water you can put into that part of the system? Like the existing lot is a very different lot than what they're putting there. So is it apples to apples? It doesn't, from the lay person, it doesn't seem like it. So I'm trying to understand. I guess my concern is, does this set any kind of precedent where you have another large development come in that wants to tie into the town system?
You're talking about volume, adding
yeah,
volume.
like
So they're not adding volume, they're actually reducing volume with their current design.
Okay.
And if they cooperate
yes.
with us,
collaborate,
then maybe maybe there might be some incentives to allow for.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm speculating.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
But that's.
I'm just trying to understand the.
Yep.
The notion of the town system comes in play with a different design, not this design, I guess, basically.
Okay.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay. Thank you
Hopefully.
for explaining that. I appreciate it.
All right. Okay, thank you. Let's talk about next meeting. A month from now would be February 19th. We have the Lawrence Street 40B project scheduled for that night, and that's a full night. So the next available date would be March 4th.
Can we do something sooner? Because we don't really have the luxury.
Well, if we did something sooner, it would be February 5th. That's really crunch time. I don't think that's not going to give anyone enough time to do anything.
Well, that's 3 weeks.
I'm not available that night.
Okay, but are you willing to give us an extension of the 180 days because we need?
Yeah, I'll talk to Cal about that. I don't see that being a problem.
Well,
everyone else chuckles, so I
no, it's not that. It's more we need to know now because we need to plan the next date. So.
I can't answer that right now.
All right.
If you want to tentatively schedule it, I know you're busy the 19th.
Why don't we schedule it the 5th, even though you can't make it, and then you have to go back to your client and get the extension.
That's fine.
So say it again, Dan.
Schedule it for the 5th, if everyone's available. Mike, in the meantime, will ask his client to extend the deadline. Then we can take it off the 5th if we get the extension.
Okay, and move it to the 4th?
Yes. Yes.
Move it to the what?
No, we would ultimately move it to the 4th if we get the extension.
Move it to the 4th of March,
So
ultimately.
there's no other dates in February?
No.
I don't think we'd have enough time to.
Yeah.
Well, no, that we can. I was thinking January.
January 29th, we have, we're meeting that night. We have a 144 Seacon, which is another 40B. That's the entire night. February 5th,
Wait, what's the? You said the 29th, right?
29th, right, is 144 Seacon. And then February 5th, which is 3 weeks out, that's, Mike's not available that night, correct?
I'm not, but let's schedule it.
Okay, so we'll schedule it for the 5th.
February 26th.
have 2 meetings scheduled in February right now, that's the issue.
What was the issue? Oh, what are your meetings? What dates?
The 5th and 19th, we have meetings in February.
And what's wrong on the 19th?
The 19th, we have a full agenda with Abbeville.
But,
Unless, unless Mike feels otherwise.
but Amy, what's on the agenda for Abbeville? Chris, do you know what, for Abbeville on the 19th, do you know what's on the agenda?
Well, it's whatever was supposed to be tonight, right? Got continued.
That whole project.
Whole thing, okay, so that's gonna take up the whole night? All
We're
right.
still waiting for the plans, though, right? We don't have.
Are they gonna have the plans ready for the 19th?
Says we will.
They said they will?
Tommy says we will.
All right.
Yeah, we voted tonight to move it to the 19th.
You can ask him to move to March and schedule this for the 19th.
And I don't know if I'm expected to be there, but I'm not here on the 5th.
Okay.
I personally wouldn't be here the 5th.
All right.
You wouldn't be on the 5th either? Okay.
Of March.
You wanna see if we can ask the applicant to move to the 4th? And we'll squeeze Al in on the 19th?
But we still need an extension, though, because
Right.
we can't possibly finish.
Okay.
So if we get the extension, it'll be moved from the 5th to the 19th. If we don't get the extension, we just go forward on the 5th. And,
No, what we're saying is we're gonna just schedule the next meeting for the 19th. And we're gonna ask the applicant for Abbeville to move his,
okay.
the 4th,
So my only concern, though, is,
March
For
4th.
for Abbeville?
Yes.
I will be out of the country, so,
Okay.
and Abbeville cannot happen if one of us four is not, so.
I don't think this one can be.
you don't think what?
I think we only have 4 voting members.
It's not like, look like the 4th is not gonna happen.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so,
Mike, Joe, Don, and Devin.
Yeah.
okay, our option then is you're not here on the 5th, right?
The 4th of March.
Correct?
5th of March.
4th of March.
4th of March.
4th of March.
Who's on first?
Sorry, 4th of March.
4th of March.
Right.
Okay,
But you
you're
also
here for
can't
the
do February 5th, right?
No, February 5th is fine for me.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Sorry, I thought you were saying,
All right. So February 5th is okay, except for
Mike.
Mike O'Shaughnessy. And
I think what we're hearing is we're probably not gonna be putting anything on March 4th. I'm hearing that we're not gonna be able to have a meeting on March 4th. Have we scheduled anything for March 4th yet?
Well, we can't have 194
Can't be-
or Abbeville.
it can't be Abbeville or this.
Right, so so we gotta be careful what we schedule for March 4th at this point, because I'm hearing people aren't gonna be here for that.
I think my recommendation would be to have this meeting on February 5th, and Mike O'Shaughnessy will talk to his client, and I think you need at least a month extension.
Okay.
And if you get the month extension, then you can pick another date, but I don't know what that other date's gonna be, because we don't really
It'll
have.
be sometime in March, obviously,
Okay.
probably. It'll probably be moved to March if we get the extension.
Okay.
But if it's a month extension, that's, we'll be right up against it again.
Unless we can squeeze into the 19th, like you said.
Personally, I'd be willing to do a special meeting on a Thursday or something.
I think you need at least 2, if not 3 more sessions of this public hearing. So,
Well, then we'll need more than 30 days, is what you're saying.
yeah, especially if we can't find a date in February.
So what would the date between February 5th and the 19th look like, Amy? If we have another, if we schedule another meeting in February, what would that Wednesday date be between the 5th and the 19th?
Well,
That's
there's
the-
the 12th, but that's conservation.
Yeah.
Okay, so conservation is,
So the 26th is
Wait, what's wrong with the 12th?
conservation meeting?
They meet here, but we could meet anywhere else, right?
can we meet downstairs?
Then I'm out then, because I planned my schedule
Okay, so you're out the 12th.
around the fact that the 12th is conservation and we don't meet, so.
Okay.
Mike, you could do both the 19th. I think a lot of Abbeville on the 19th is going to be traffic, so it sort of segues with what they're going to do with their traffic. So it seems to be a long night.
Wouldn't Abbeville on the 19th be mostly just their presentation? isn't it? Because we haven't seen anything yet.
All right, I think that's gonna be our best solution. It's gonna be a long night, but, let's schedule it for the, I'll entertain a motion for the 19th, Joe, to continue this hearing.
Well,
No?
we said,
Fifth, we're moving to the 5th at first.
move to the 5th to get the extension, and then we move it to the 19th when we get the extension.
Okay, so,
Right, so I make a motion that we move the hearing for 194 Main Street to February 5th at 7 o'clock or 7:15?
7:15.
7:15?
Wanna do 7:15? We have a 7 o'clock.
Yes,
Or
7:15.
Yeah.
So 17, so moving 194 Main Street to March 5th, February 5th at 7:15.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And Mike, maybe we should set some deadlines for submissions, so we are looking for a submission on traffic from the applicant. Can you get that to us a week before the 5th? We gotta have it, we definitely need it at least a few days so we can digest it. So February,
You get to us
We're
by
get-
that,
we're getting
that
the-
Monday?
I thought we're getting the feeling, though, there might be a continuation to the 19th, though.
can't assume it.
Okay, right, but anyway,
So let's say it's February 1st? Or how about January 31st? That's a Friday.
Well, no one's gonna be here to receive it.
Or they can email it to all of us, and
All right, okay, if they can do it directly.
so
If they can send it to you and you can distribute it, Dan?
traffic submittal and a revised waiver list by January 31st. And if you are gonna present any new plans, present them by that date too, so we can have it in advance of there. Whatever, any changes you're gonna make, if you're gonna make any site design changes or architectural changes. This is assuming, yeah, I'm just assuming we're gonna have the 5th, which we probably aren't, but the worst case scenario, that's when we would need those materials. If we get pushed off until the 19th, then a week before the 19th. Does that make sense? And then, Mike, if you can confirm with Amy and I about an extension, then we have a form to sign that we'll send to you.
Good, all right, I think we're done, thank you. Have a good night. Chris, if you want to, 5-minute break?
We have to
All right.
close?
What's that?
We have to close the public
No,
hearing?
no, we're gonna take a 5-minute break first.
no, we're not closing, the public hearing is still open.
You voted.
Yeah,
We voted to
we
continue.
voted to move it to
Yes.
to the 5th,
Yeah. No, we're just
so
gonna
we
take a
can move
5-minute
it to the
break.
19th. I'm looking at calendars and stuff, so. I never plan travel on the second Wednesday, because I'm told we never have a meeting on the second.
Reschedule, Dan.
Yeah,
No, I
well,
plan,
we used to have just one a
I
month.
plan the 1st and 3rd.
No, I understand.
First and 3rd, okay?
Things have changed.
I'll go to Florida, California, Florida. Well,
All right, you want to get it out of the way?
Yeah, get it
All
out of the
right.
way. Kevin's ready to. Amy has it. That one's been going on.
And again, now I remember you mentioned this. Yes, it really has to. You won't bring that up to you.
Ready?
No, there you go. Waiting for Amy. He's really making it hard, isn't he?
Fine.
Soundsproof's really
Oh, I
making it
know
hard.
it. I know.
I know.
It could be so easy.
Have a good night, thank you.
Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah, I mean, we should make. No.
All right, so we're gonna.
Rich is saying.
Are you back in session yet?
Design.
Not yet.
How does that fit in aesthetically with the town? I mean, it looks like it would be out on Route 9. I don't get it.
You mean like Fountainhead or something?
Yeah, the big one over there, right? Over there by the pike.
You're a star.
That's over there in Westboro.
I mean, so. The design, do you have something to say about the aesthetics of the building?
Did you, when you came,
Other than the dimensions,
you only came in a few minutes ago, correct?
yeah.
There was probably a good 45 minutes of discussion on the design. And what I would suggest, rather than us trying to, is go on YouTube and watch the first 45 minutes. And I think you'll get a better appreciation of
We were pushing him in a different direction. We can't promulgate it, but we can push it.
Show her the sketch. We don't have those sketches. We don't have those sketches.
No, we do.
In our package.
Foundation problems.
Oh, that sketch, I got you. Oh, yeah, that's a great, I wasn't gonna show that.
That's what was on the screen.
That's right.
This thing. No, it's just, when do I have to write it up by, okay, because I'm, huh? Yeah, I'm leaving Friday morning to fly to Charlotte.
For better construction.
I'll be back on Sunday, and then I'm home for a week and a half, and then.
Amy, I don't know if I want to address the 35 later tonight. I want to think about that one a little bit, okay?
Which one's that, Chris?
It's just a minor change. He doesn't want to do an as-built.
I think we had reason we wanted an as-built on that one for some reason. I just don't remember, but I don't wanna just remove it if there's a reason why we should have it.
No, it's a different one. That's why I said I'm not going to. I'd rather look at it closer.
All right.
Than remove his as-built. He said if it's a minor modification, we don't need it.
I feel like I might have. Just that.
Say again?
I feel like I might have you had.
As long as it's a precedent, cut and paste from it.
This one doesn't look like the one you're asking for. Touch base with me tomorrow on it. Because we can do it without a full board review. Yeah. So I'll give you that one.
You can write up that one.
No, I don't think that's right. We got a lawyer for that one. Everybody ready?
Yes.
Welcome back to the zoning board of appeals meeting at 9:15 PM for January 15th. At this time, at 7:30, we had scheduled 15 Lincoln Road, which is a major solar field. The applicant has asked for a continuance till March 4th, or actually asked for a continuance. I would suggest March 4th, so could I have a motion to continue 15 Lincoln Road, special permit request till March 4th, 2020 at 7 PM.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Ask a question.
You like that?
You have a
All-
question?
Are they asking a continuance just because they're working with the planning board?
Correct. Correct. Okay,
All right.
all right. Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. All right. At this time, let's look at 7 Phillips Way. This is the special permit for the contractor's headquarters and parking in the rear and parking in the front that Jim Souza just went through with us a few minutes ago. So why don't we start with finding of facts?
I'll write this up, Chris.
Right. So if you
All
go
right.
over each one of the special permit,
Criteria?
yeah,
You like-
well, no, before the criteria, you're going, there's 3 different things for the special permit, right?
Correct.
So what's the first one again? I don't have.
Contractor headquarters
Right,
off-site, which is allowed by special permit.
right,
A parking in the rear,
right.
3 or more spots,
Right.
which he wants 9. And then parking in the front.
Okay, and he has 8.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so but we just have to acknowledge those finding of facts then.
Correct.
Okay. So we gotta get that for Don. So I was going to get in the right findings for each of the 3 items. So the fact that it's a contractor headquarters, it's because it's located where? Off highway?
It's off-highway.
Okay,
the
allowed by
C
special
district?
permit, right?
Correct.
Okay, so there's nothing other to say then. This is we're able to give a special permit for the fact that he's located off highway.
Correct.
I don't know of any other special facts other than he's applied for that and we're willing to grant that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other than how the criteria that he's filled out applies.
Second was the parking in front,
Parking in front,
Correct.
and,
which is by special permit only.
right,
Correct.
and just acknowledging there's 8 spaces. The handicaps were on the side or in the front also? Or was one
He has
handicap?
1 handicap.
So one of the 8 are handicapped.
Okay.
And then he has construction vehicles parked in the rear?
Yep.
Right.
The outdoor storage room with
You
3
want-
commercial vehicles
so
in the rear.
It's gonna be 9.
Hold on. That's the special permit requirement. Outdoor storage of
Of vehicles in the rear.
Of
three or-
three or more.
Mhm.
And we're.
More
acknow-
than 3, actually. More than 3.
And we're acknowledging he wants to park 9.
Okay, and he wants to do 9. Okay?
Is there any other finding of facts associated with that, other than he's located in a district that's zoned for this, right?
This can be combined into one write-up, or should I write it up as 3 special
No.
permits?
No, it's
Right
one
up
of
this one.
Right, right.
Yeah. You can reference, we'll have to reference the drawing.
Yeah, the reference, like.
I got it. Yep.
Yep. I'll sign that.
It'll be titled by as it's titled.
Yeah, I got it.
Actually, Amy, this one must be an old one. The one he gave us,
Tonight
the
is
one he
here.
shows tonight is slightly different. So,
Yeah, this is,
Right.
this is the
This- this is
revised.
tonight.
yeah, but this one is, yeah. This one
What
is-
is the date on that
That's
one?
right, I don't have a large size one.
Yeah.
The one in your packet is.
Okay.
Right, okay.
This is revised as of 1/14, as it says.
Right,
revision.
so we'll reference that.
Mhm.
Because it shows the number of vehicles, it actually shows the condition on the planning board, it shows the area of the building, the total area of the site. I think we talked last time about lighting, finding of fact, this lighting will be directed.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the initial hearing.
you
No,
weren't?
no, that's
Okay.
why I was mentioning Don
Yep.
was here.
Lighting will be directed onto the site.
Right.
That the area will be paved for the 9 vehicles in the rear, which was a question at the last meeting.
Well, actually, all parking will be paved.
Yes. But he had not initially, he wasn't gonna do the rear.
Right.
Anything else? Devin? Mike?
Just go over the criteria.
Okay, we'll go through the criteria. The
Don't-
use must be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the bylaw. The site abuts another contractor's yard. The outdoor storage will be located to the east of the building and will be screened by vegetation.
You'll need a copy of this.
Yes, I know that.
The use is in an appropriate location and is not detrimental to the neighborhood and does not significantly alter the character of the zoning district. Outdoor storage is allowed in the district. Several surrounding properties have received special permits for outdoor storage in excess of 1,000 square feet. The outdoor storage area will be located to the east of the building and will be screened by vegetation. Adequate and appropriate facilities will be provided for the proper operation of the proposed use. Stormwater runoff from the outdoor storage shall be captured, treated, and discharged to the Shire Park drainage system. The outdoor storage shall be located to the east of the building and have vegetated screening. The proposed use would not be detrimental or offensive to the adjoining zoning district and neighboring properties due to the effects of lighting, odor, smoke, noise, sewage, refuge, materials, visual, or other nuisances. The outdoor storage shall be located to the east of the building and have a vegetative buffer to provide screening to the abutting properties. The proposed use would not cause undue traffic congestion in the immediate area. The outdoor storage area will be an accessory area for the landscape contractor business. There is no additional traffic anticipated from the outdoor storage area. All truck traffic to and from the site will use the Shire Drive roadway to access and egress from Route 1A. Truck no right turn, truck directional signs have been included in the site plan. A proper site plan has been filed for approval with the planning board, and the proper number of copies submitted with the application for a special permit to the Board of Appeals. Site plan submitted to the planning board on, do you know the date that, Amy is gone. We don't have a date, but yes, it was submitted. The use and purpose is consistent with the 1992 master plan as most recently updated. The Town of Norfolk 2007 master plan indicates that a commercial district development is needed to reduce tax revenue generation from the residential tax base. The applicant is proposing to develop a site with a building, parking, and utilities to comply with the town regulations. This proposed includes an outdoor storage area, which will be located to the east of the site and will have vegetative buffer encompassing the area. Based on the above and proposed accomplishes the development of the property within the town regulations while increasing the tax revenue. Okay?
I just want to look at one thing on there.
Yeah.
But no, that covers it, obviously.
What are you looking
Yeah.
for?
So, Amy, when you get a chance, can you check with, I guess, Rich, on these applications, the Appendix B, we keep seeing this Town of Norfolk 2007 master plan. I want to know if that's the correct wording for that? Oh, right, so this has been updated, correct? Okay,
I
okay.
did check with them on that.
All right, so good, so hopefully.
It's been updated, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. I just know it's come up a few times that we want to make sure. Thank you.
Do we know when it was, the site plan was submitted to the planning board?
The submittal.
The submittal for 17,
Yeah.
I mean 7
Yeah.
Phillips, when it
Right.
was submitted to the.
Yeah, just, it has it, it says site plan submitted to planning board on, and it's left blank. Not that it matters,
No, but I
but,
can find out tomorrow.
okay, just let Dawn know.
Planning board file.
Yeah. It's not that important for us,
Okay.
okay? Anything else?
We're gonna need copies of the submission.
Criteria.
Chris, what was our final fact on the location of the parking?
Location of the,
Location of the commercial parking.
You mean the commercial vehicles, the construction vehicles?
construction appeals is the rear. 9 of them,
He needs a special permit for 3 or more,
more than 3.
more than 3. So
Yes.
he's proposing 9, so we needed to approve that. But they'll be parked in the rear of the building.
Correct.
And it'll be paved.
Mm-hmm. And the spots are gonna be, who is it over? They're actually gonna be 10 by 30 spots in the rear. And he's identified the size of the vehicles for the rear.
Yeah, he's got, there's a paragraph right here.
Mm-hmm. Stall dimensions, 10 by 30, 10 by 20, 10 by 30, 11 by 30, 10 by 30.
Based on the side of his trucks. What are you thinking?
So J7A2B, outdoor storage of more than 3 commercial building vehicles limited to the rear yard. So,
Isn't one of those special permits they're asking parking in front?
That's
There's
just
parking
right,
in
that's
front as
regular,
well.
yeah, but that's regular
Yeah.
parking.
Regular parking.
Yeah.
Yeah, not overnight parking.
So what's the question?
So the question is where this commercial vehicles are now, that's a side yard.
No, they're gonna be in the rear yard.
Wasn't,
Where are you looking?
well, Phillips Way would be considered the front yard. Would it not?
He's
I
talking
don't
about,
know. I don't think that's considered the front yard.
he's talking about this right here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, he's talking about this.
Right, that's
Way.
Phil's Way, and this is where the trucks are gonna be, right,
Right.
right?
It's a side yard, not the backyard.
But I think it's coming off of Shire Drive. Shire Drive, I think, is the front yard. Because Phillips Way is a dead end. Shire Drive is the main road going in.
But Phillips Way would still, it would still have a front yard.
It would have a front yard setback, but it wouldn't be the front yard.
Right.
It would have a front yard setback.
So
But I think Shire Drive is the
that's
front
more or
yard.
less my question is,
Right.
what are we saying is the yard, just as precedent for the board?
We're referring to these spaces here, is this, we referred to these as being the front yard here,
Correct.
right?
Correct. So your question is, because there's, what are you looking at? You're looking at it as a corner lot? Is that what you're trying to?
I'm just trying to understand, if we were to grant the permit, what do you define as the rear yard? So would we define the rear yard, it's an awkward shaped lot,
Mm-hmm.
where it's more or less shaped like a hammerhead lot.
I mean, I would define, I would think Shire Drive would be the main road end, so I would assume the 8 spaces would be the front yard.
So, and where is Shire Drive then on this
It's
map?
to the left, to the right, I'm sorry, to the right of the building.
So this right next to it, there's a proposed 7,480 square foot commercial building, it says.
He's done with this.
You're looking at a different plan. Yeah, I'm just,
Yeah.
for some reason I have a plan that
Yeah.
has missing.
Right, so he's talking about this is the
Yeah.
proposed building, we're talking about this guy,
Right.
right? So,
And we're saying this is the front,
yes,
and this is the back, and
Mhm.
everything's fine.
so we're not clear on where Shire Drive is.
Saying, that, isn't that the street?
He's saying this is the front because the address is Phillips Way. And this becomes the side, and the
Right.
special permit is for construction vehicles parking in the back.
Let's see if he's got anything else here.
Because to me, the rear yard seems like that.
Well, it wouldn't make sense for the your yard to be down here. I mean, this would make no sense. That would be your rear yard, which would make no sense on what his proposal is. Because if you're saying Phillips is the front, that's his rear.
That's exactly.
Yeah. I don't think that would make, that certainly isn't what they're proposing. I have to look and see what.
And there's no room back there.
No.
Because of the drainage swale.
Amy, do you also who the other? Island Lighting is on Phillips Way, but a lot of them are on Sharon Ave. Do we have a bigger map, Amy, that shows us some of these other buildings that are on this road or this area? ideally, according to this, Island Lighting's on Shire Drive, which is one of their abutters.
There's only, on Shire, on Phillips, I think there's only 5 and 7, I don't know what they are. It's up on the screen, right?
Can you make it a little bit bigger, right there, so we can?
Just zoom in right on number 7.
So where is Shire, show us exactly Shire Drive is, and what's the road on the right there? Is that all? Yes,
Sharon Ave,
that's Sharon, okay.
and then it turns into Phillips Way here.
It goes into that cul-de-sac?
Yeah, it actually ends there.
Oh, so you're saying that's a Shire Drive extension from, once it passes Sharon Avenue?
Yeah.
Right.
The planning board was also talking about possibly changing that from Phillips Way to make it Shire, part of Shire. But I don't know, the steps are not at all.
Can you just scroll down for just a second? I want to see where the hammerhead is and, oh, it doesn't show the hammerhead as,
Can you build it up a little bit? Open, can you make it larger?
So he's considering this the front yard, at least the way we've been looking at it, right?
Right. And
Because that circle would be Shire Drive?
if it's no longer Phillips Way and it became Shire Drive, then the corner becomes the front. so-
Right.
Because what I'm concerned about is now, this becomes just an entire front yard. You get your side yard here, you get your side yard where it jogs back, and now you have parking on one side of it.
And there's supposed to be a proposal for 5, I think it's 5 Phillips is the proposal? For a building. According to that plan, it looks like there's something proposed right here.
Because to me,
Yeah.
if I could equate it to just another lot, would be if that, all those vehicles were stored along, this property line. You're getting this, you have, what I'm thinking is you're getting a side yard there.
If the planning board were to recharacterize it as Shire Drive,
Nope.
Hmm?
Can you go back, Amy?
Looking at that, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a chance the planning board has decided what the front yard is already for us here? And that may have to go back to them as a question?
Well, they've already submitted site plan, they've already submitted site plan for this, right?
Right, they're just looking for these different special
Yeah.
permits.
And we're just, right, these are all
Right.
special
So I'm
permits. So
just saying-
assuming the planning board has deemed it, that is the front yard.
Right, so I say we may need to validate that to make our decision if that's
so do we have to get a memo from the planning board stating that they've determined that that's the front
Oh,
yard?
Is Rich still here, Amy?
No,
He left?
yeah.
Or you could just, we'll have to find out from Rich.
Does the assessor's map tell you how much frontage there is?
I don't think we have it in here. Can you bring it up?
I think it,
What lot was the proposed building that mentioned to you?
Right here, it just says here, it's only based on this plan here, but they're saying when we looked at it, see, there's something called 5, I guess, Phillips over there. It says a proposed 7,000 square foot building.
What lot is this one?
Well, it doesn't have a lot number on it though, but I'm saying, but it would be.
Yeah, what's the lot he's showing
Okay.
on his building?
Doesn't
say what lot we're looking
Doesn't
at?
say lot number, no.
It's on the application.
Yeah,
It doesn't say it specifically in this plan.
see if we can rectify this.
Unless it's on the, let's see here, hold on.
Map 18 block, lot 41, 1247.
Okay, you wanna get that for the,
Yeah, what is it again?
Lot 12,
it's in the application.
41-12. So. And does it say what the other lot is there, the proposed?
No, it doesn't say it.
Doesn't say what that is?
No.
Okay.
No, it just says 7,460 square foot commercial building.
That makes sense of his. We'll figure this out, right? We have to.
It's here, right here. I mean, I guess it's, like I said, we'll need the planning board determination that the way this thing is positioned around that circle, are they saying this is the front, you know?
Amy, do you have the plans that were submitted to the planning board? Like, they're like setbacks,
I can go get them in the office.
would you mind?
No. Actually, you know, it's on the hard drive. Yeah. So actually, the plans you have for the 114 are the ones that were shown to the planning board last time. The whole set is here, if you want to just go through or anything, you can come use them up or whatever.
Usually they have a, you know, a table, you know, table, with all their setback.
Right.
You can look at whatever else you have.
That one that, Amy, you had up that showed the lots,
It was the first thing you had up
the
before.
first thing you had up, could we take a look at that again?
Yeah, that was before Devin
When you
came over.
just, yeah, just when you sat down, Devin, there was a one that showed all the different lots. There we go.
Yeah.
Can you blow that up for a second? So, if, we're looking at here, we're looking at lot 3A, am I correct? Or are we looking at lot 14B?
We're looking at the two that are shaded.
Okay, all right. So, if in fact Shire Drive were extended per what Chris said, and Phillips Way became just Shire Drive, this lot, as it appears here, would still front onto Shire Drive. Correct?
So, this is the lot
Right.
right here.
Yes, that's the frontal.
That
That's the
blue
front.
that I'm highlighting
Mm-hmm.
Your question is very valuable,
Yes.
very valid,
And,
highly valued.
And then this internal lot line that it looks like they're
Yeah.
going to remove would be, that's the side yard,
Right.
which is.
I guess
where
part of the
we have the
interpretation, what is the planning board saying, because there's this other piece of property that's part of all this? Like, all that looks like the rear, in terms of everything else that's going on?
Well, what they could do is ask for a variance versus a special permit based on the fact that the existing drainage swale and the erosion control,
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to go there anyway.
that they
Right,
couldn't go there,
Right,
right?
right,
So
right,
that,
yeah.
in other words, under a variance, it's the conditions and topography prevents
Right.
issuing a special permit.
Because to me, that's,
Yeah,
Right, but
no,
we got you.
very
We
valid
got
point.
you. It's a very valid point because we set a precedent.
Yeah.
But they could go for a variance
Yeah.
for construction vehicles parked in the side because they can't go for a special permit.
I think what we're gonna have to do is wait, hold off.
Have the planning board help us.
Well, no, we can just we can talk to Jim Souza. They're the ones who presented.
Okay.
Ask them to come back at the next meeting
All right.
and explain it, or send us a memo. He doesn't have to come back, he can
Okay.
explain it,
Okay.
and we'll go
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah, because I said, it's kind of, I know when you look at something like this, you're saying this has got to be the rear, right?
Yeah.
But yet.
It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
Yep.
Because in the end, if there's a new building going here and a new developed property here, this really won't be the front.
Could not that be resolved with a variance? Correct?
Well, we should check it, because, we have given special permits to other properties up there, so we have to check it. So we'll have to find out.
Well, the only special permit we can give is rear parking. The only way we could give side parking is through a variance, because it says by special permit, you can park construction vehicles in the side. Sorry,
No,
in
no,
the rear.
in the rear.
And if you
Right.
can't park them in the rear because of the topography,
Right.
then you'd have to do a variance, so we could say you can park them in the side.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a lot of work to apply for a variance to get apply all the.
So what we'll do is we'll hold off, we'll ask Souza to explain us, he can send us a letter, and we'll go from there. I'm sure there's some reasonable explanation to it, but we should know it before we make a decision.
Plus the planning board, we assume would have guided them to what they needed special permits for. So,
I'm sure there's an explanation, but we should know it, and we know the answer,
Right.
so we'll hold off.
Yep,
Okay.
good, granted.
All right, so with that, I don't think we have any other business. Anybody else have any other business they want to address? If not, okay. Could I have a motion to close the zoning board of appeals meeting at 9:40 PM?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?